Have you ever felt a strange pull toward a prophecy you don't remember reading, a whisper in your mind that doesn't belong to you? A sudden shiver when you hear the word apocalypse, as if something ancient inside you suddenly lifts its head and listens. That is not imagination. Carl Jung believed that when humanity nears a breaking point, the collective unconscious begins to tremble, sending warnings through dreams, fears, symbols, and intuitions long before any disaster becomes real. And right now, that collective mind is screaming louder than ever. Every culture recorded signs of a final collapse. But they all share one terrifying detail: certain cities fall first, not because of politics, not because of war, but because of archetypal destiny. Jung argued that cities have souls just like people, and when those souls become corrupted, unbalanced, or bloated with shadow energy, they attract destruction like iron to a magnet. So if you ever wondered why some cities feel heavy, why some places make you uneasy, why some regions feel like they're carrying the burden of the world's sins, you are not imagining anything. Civilization is not just collapsing, it is collapsing exactly where the archetypes predicted, and the first city is the one Jung studied more than any other when he explored the myth of the beast Jerusalem. This is where the story of the apocalypse truly begins, not with fire, not with monsters, but with psychology, the psychology of a collective shadow, thousands of years old. Jung believed that Jerusalem is more than a physical location, it is the symbolic center of humanity's spiritual conflict. The city where light and shadow wrestle for dominance every century, rising again and again like the beating heart of the world. And every prophecy, ancient, religious, and psychological, points to the same truth: the first blow of the beast doesn't fall randomly, it falls where the subconscious of humanity is already fractured and overburdened with meaning. Jerusalem stands at the crossroads of history, belief, war, identity, and ego, a city soaked in dreams and blood where every stone carries the memory of human desire and human destruction. Jung warned that when the symbolic weight of a city becomes too great, it collapses under the pressure, not metaphorically but literally, and he feared that Jerusalem had already crossed that threshold. The modern world sees conflict there as political, but Jung saw it as inevitable archetypal eruption, the shadow of the collective unconscious rising through a fault line that has existed since the dawn of civilization, centuries of unresolved trauma, religious obsession, power struggle, and spiritual yearning, all concentrated in one fragile point. Jung wrote that archetypes behave like forces of nature. They do not ask permission. They do not compromise. They break through, and when they break, they drag cities down with them. This is why in apocalyptic visions, Jerusalem is always the first domino, because it is the most psychologically charged place on earth. The beast in Jungian terms is not a creature but a shadow archetype, the embodiment of everything humanity refuses to face: greed, power, corruption, spiritual emptiness, moral decay. And as Jung said, whatever you refuse to confront in the daylight returns to you multiplied in the darkness. Once the beast emerges, symbolically or politically or collectively, it marks its first territory in the city whose spiritual foundation is already cracking. Jung believed Jerusalem represents the torn psyche of humanity, the split between what we claim to be and what we truly are. And when a psyche splits, violently, collapse follows. The fall begins long before any physical destruction. It starts when the collective unconscious withdraws its support from a place, when a city no longer carries the weight it once held, when symbolism turns toxic. Jung said that when symbols turn dark, societies crumble from within, and Jerusalem is the world's most powerful symbol, now radiating tension, conflict, fear, prophecy, and destiny all at once. And the question Jung would ask today is chilling: has the beast already entered its first city, not as a horned monster, but as a psychological force shaping leaders, conflicts, decisions, and events? Jerusalem is not just vulnerable, it is archetypally targeted. The collective shadow has chosen it, and the collapse begins not with weapons but with meaning, when a city becomes the battleground of the collective unconscious. The fall is no longer a matter of if only, when, and the terrifying part is this: Jung said that when the first symbolic city falls, the others follow, not gradually but rapidly, because archetypes move like storms through human society. And after Jerusalem, the second city is the one no one expects, the one that carries the financial shadow of the world, Babylon, not the ancient one but the modern one. You know exactly which city that is, but before we go there we must finish the truth. Jung left hidden Jerusalem is the spark, but the fire is global, and the beast is not coming, it is already awake. Jung believed that once the first symbolic heart of humanity shakes, the shockwave does not stay contained, it spreads through the collective unconscious looking for the next weakest point. The next city bloated with unresolved shadow, and that is where the modern world faces a truth most people are not ready to hear, because the second city to fall is not chosen by prophecy or religion, but by the archetypal patterns of human greed. Jung said that every civilization has two capitals, one spiritual and one economic. The spiritual one guides the soul, and the economic one corrupts it. When the spiritual center collapses, the economic center follows like a collapsing pillar, and Jung warned that Babylon's archetype has never died, it only changed names. He described Babylon as the city of excess, a place where wealth blinds morality, where power replaces meaning, where desire grows faster than wisdom, and when a city becomes the center of unchecked consumption, Jung said it becomes a magnet for collapse, a self-fulfilling prophecy disguised as success. Most people imagine Babylon as ancient ruins, but the archetype reappears wherever humanity builds a tower too tall, too arrogant, too detached from the soul. The modern Babylon is the financial lighthouse of the world, the city whose stock markets control nations, whose corporations influence governments, whose currency shapes destinies. Jung argued that the archetype of Babylon represents the collective ego, inflated, swollen, and intoxicated, and when the ego of a civilization becomes too large, the unconscious punishes it by tearing down the structures it built. Jung wrote that the collapse of an archetype feels like fate, but is actually psychology unfolding on a global scale, and this modern Babylon is already showing signs that Jung predicted long ago: rising instability, widening moral decay, increasing economic illusions, and the shadow of corruption leaking through every layer of society. The collapse here will not begin with fire, but with silence, the silence before markets crash, the silence before panic erupts, the silence before a city realizes it was standing on psychological quicksand. Jung said that societies don't fall because they are weak, they fall because they refuse to see their shadow, and the second city refuses more than any other. It hides its rot under glowing lights, skyscrapers, luxury, innovation, and power. But Jung warned that the brighter a city shines, the darker its hidden shadow becomes, and once the spiritual center, Jerusalem, cracks, symbolically the economic center, Babylon loses its protection. In Jungian terms, the archetypal weight that kept it stable evaporates, leaving it exposed, vulnerable, and naked before the beast. But here is the secret. Jung never said the beast is an external force. He said it is the collective shadow of humanity unleashed when fear, greed, and spiritual emptiness reach critical mass. The beast takes form through systems collapsing, through leaders making desperate decisions, through people acting irrationally. It spreads not like a monster, but like a wave of psychological contagion. First, Jerusalem, because it holds the world's spiritual tension, then Babylon, because it holds the world's financial tension. These two collapses form the spine of the apocalypse, not in a religious sense, but in a psychological sense. Jung believed that civilizations fall in stages: awareness, denial, shock, collapse, and rebirth, and we are now entering the shock stage, the point where symbols begin to break down, where people feel something shifting even if they don't understand why. Jung said the unconscious always warns before disaster, and many people around the world are feeling exactly that: a heaviness, a restlessness, a fear they cannot explain, dreams of falling cities, blood moons, ruined skylines, strange anxiety rising without reason. These are not coincidences, they are symptoms of the collective unconscious preparing for the next stage. But there is something even more disturbing. Jung left behind a warning that after the first two cities fall, symbolically or literally, these spreads to the places that believed they were safe, the cities built on pride, the cities that worshiped their own identity, the cities that believe collapse could never touch them. And the third city on the list is the most unexpected of all: the cultural capital of the world, the city whose influence shapes minds, music, fashion, politics, ideology, and dreams. The city Jung believed carried the archetype of illusion, the city built not on faith or wealth, but on identity and ego. And once its illusion cracks, the world realizes that the apocalypse is not about one place, it is about the collapse of the collective self. When that city begins to fall, humanity enters the irreversible stage. the final descent into collective shadow and the rise of something entirely new. Jung believed the third fall is the most shocking because it is not triggered by religion like Jerusalem or by greed like Babylon, but by identity, the psychological mask of an entire civilization, and there is one city on earth that represents that mask more than any other, a city that does not merely exist, but performs, a city that sells, dreams, shapes culture, manufactures desire, and projects an image of perfection so powerful that even its citizens forget it is an illusion. Jung warned that illusions are the most dangerous archetypes because they are fragile, and once an illusion shatters, everything built on it collapses with terrifying speed. This third city is not chosen by prophecy, but by psychology. It is the global capital of entertainment, influence, modern mythology, and curated identity. Jung said that when a civilization begins worshipping images instead of meaning, it enters the archetype of the mirage, the point where society becomes obsessed with fame, fantasy, projection, and artificial versions of reality. This city is the beating heart of that mirage, and Jung believed that when the collective unconscious decides that the illusion has run its course, it tears the mask away brutally. This fall does not begin with war or economics. It begins with cultural breakdown, movements turning into chaos, ideologies turning into battlefield celebrities, turning into symbols of collapse, identity politics devouring reason, communities fracturing over belief, and reality itself becoming contested. Jung wrote that when truth becomes subjective, the archetype of the trickster takes over society, and this city is the birthplace of the modern trickster, the city where narratives matter more than facts, where stories are currency, where perception outranks truth. Jung warned that the trickster archetype acts like wildfire. It spreads through technology, social media, entertainment, and collective behavior, turning every disagreement into division, every mistake into rage, every narrative into a weapon. The fall begins subtly at first: scandals, cultural fractures, rising hostility, public outrage, but then the unconscious tightens its grip and the shadow breaks loose in full force. Jung said the collective shadow attacks exactly where identity is weakest, and this city has built its identity on an image that cannot survive crisis. Once this illusion cracks, the world sees the raw chaos beneath, and when the world sees the chaos, the archetype collapses completely, and with it collapses the city that held it up. Jung wrote that once the third city falls, society enters the final stage of apocalypse, the unveiling, the moment the collective unconscious reveals what humanity has refused to see for centuries. He said the apocalypse means revelation, not destruction, and the revelation is this: humanity has been living in fragments. Jerusalem, the broken spiritual self; Babylon, the greedy material self; the mirage city, the false projected self. And when these three collapse, the real confrontation begins, not with the beast, but with what the beast represents, the hidden truth inside all of us. Jung believed the beast is the shadow humanity has denied for too long: our addiction to power, our fear of meaning, our obsession with illusion, our emptiness disguised as ambition, our loneliness disguised as freedom, our rage disguised as righteousness. Once the three symbolic cities collapse, Jung argued that humanity faces a choice: descend into chaos or rise into consciousness, and the collapse is not punishment, it is correction, the unconscious restoring balance by force, the end of an era so a new one can begin. Jung wrote that the real apocalypse is inner, not outer. It begins when the old symbols lose their power, when the old towers fall, when the old identities die, when the illusions burn away. Only then can the new myth of humanity emerge. But here is the most haunting part. Jung warned that during this transition, the beast grows stronger, not because it gains power, but because humanity loses clarity. He said that the greatest danger is not destruction, but meaninglessness. Once the three cities fall, symbolically or literally, people lose the illusions that kept them stable, and the unconscious floods them with fear, desperation, and chaos. The beast is not an entity, it is our own unintegrated shadow rising to fill the void. But Jung believed that even in the darkest collapse there is a spark of rebirth. He said that humanity is reborn only after its illusions die. The fall of Jerusalem awakens the spiritual self, the fall of Babylon awakens the moral self, the fall of the mirage city awakens the true self beyond identity, and only then does the beast lose Power not because it is defeated, but because it loses the shadows it feeds on. Jung believed that the apocalypse is actually the beginning of a collective transformation, the moment humanity finally confronts itself without masks, without lies, without illusions. But that transformation comes with a cost, the end of the world as we know it, the collapse of the centers that shaped our beliefs, our wealth, our identities, and in their ashes. Jung said a different civilization will rise, one grounded, not in ego, but in consciousness, not in fear, but in understanding, not in illusion. But in truth, the fall of the three cities is not the end, it is the opening of the door humanity has avoided for centuries, the door to a new world, a world that can only be built once the beast within is finally understood.